Today's episode is sponsored by Land Gorilla, the premier software for managing renovation and construction loans. Let's face it, renovation loans can be messy, but your draw management shouldn't be. Land Gorilla brings draw requests, disbursements, change orders, and project data all into one single experience. The platform eliminates communication gaps so you can deliver faster draws and scale your pipeline safely. Learn more at landgorilla.com. One of the fastest ways to derail a renovation loan is to underestimate the importance of documenting a contractor's credentials. I get it. It requires extra research. You have to persuade contractors to cooperate. It's work. But before we even talk about vetting contractors, let's take a moment to clarify something. Homeowners will often shop for contractors, but the only information you need is the contact information for the contractor they intend to hire and that contractor's bid. You do not need to gather all the competitive bids that a homeowner has obtained. Now let's get back to vetting. Most loan officers have no idea what's involved in this process, so they don't know how to set the stage. If you approach it with a demanding tone, contractors will push back, and borrowers can become very frustrated because they don't understand what's required or why you're asking for it. But vetting contractors serves an important purpose. The lender is financing work that hasn't yet been completed, which means that the contractor becomes one of the largest risk factors in the transaction. In this episode, we're going to talk about why contractor vetting matters, what lenders typically collect, common mistakes lenders make, and how to make the process easier for everybody involved. Let's start with why contractor vetting exists and ask the obvious question, why does a lender care? Because a lender isn't just financing a property, they're financing a future outcome. The completed project, it doesn't exist yet. So the lender needs confidence that the contractor is legit, they're qualified, they can legally perform the work, they're properly insured, that they're going to be able to successfully complete this project from start to finish. In doing this, vetting these contractors, it protects the borrower, especially first-time homebuyers who may have never had experience hiring a contractor before. It protects the lender, the investor if the loan's being sold, and it protects the property's future value. When you're reaching out to contractors, before you send a single email, I recommend you pick up the phone. Call the contractor, have a conversation, and explain that you're going to be verifying their credentials, and it's required for the loan program. Review any bid requirements that they need to know about before they spend time preparing a bid, and explain the draw process for that loan program. Approach this with the attitude that you're not quote-unquote approving them, you're simply vetting them, and then explain why these credentials are required, how the vetting process works, what documentation they're going to need, prepare them for that in advance, and then how many draws are going to be dispersed. We'll cover draw requirements in detail later in the series, but for now, just explain the basics. When I was originating and I would speak with contractors, sometimes I wouldn't say much more than, these programs work on a reimbursement basis. You do some work, your work is inspected, then you get paid. You do more work, your work is inspected, and then you get paid, and so on. Unfortunately, some of the loan programs, they don't allow for initial deposits. Would you need one to complete this project? And then listen. And when I say listen, I mean really listen, which I feel is hypocritical because I'm not the world's best listener. It's a skill I am continuously working on. But I have found that contractors will often reveal more in a 10-minute conversation than you're ever going to glean from a bunch of emails going back and forth. When you talk with them, you're going to hear confidence in their voice, or conversely, frustration. You're going to discern professionalism or the lack thereof. You're going to be able to identify their experience or red flags. Many contractors, they're going to volunteer information you never asked for, and that information is extremely valuable. I actually love talking to contractors because it takes me back in time to when I was younger, and I would go with Grandpa up to the local diner, and he would meet all of his buddies, and they would sit around a table and chit-chat over coffee. And I don't know, there's just something about talking to contractors, dare I call it the good old boys club, that reminds me of those times with Grandpa uptown at the diner. Let's cover what lenders typically are going to ask for. Most contractor vetting processes are going to require some company information. It usually comes in the form of a contractor profile report or a contractor profile form. And it's going to ask for information from the contractor about their business structure, how long they've been in business, how many employees they have. It might ask them to identify their areas of expertise, where they're legally licensed to do work or registered to do work, and a little bit about their work history. Then the lender will ask for supporting documentation. Proof of licensing or registration, liability coverage, workers' compensation, any specialty certificates like, I don't know, radon, asbestos, lead-based paint, that kind of thing, and a signed W-9. Some lenders, they go a step further and they ask for bank references and trade references, credit reports, background checks, which brings me to another opinion. Don't make contractor vetting more painful than necessary. Some lenders, they ask contractors for everything short of a blood sample. And in my experience, that's a big mistake. Bank references, usually not terribly helpful. Trade references, rarely insightful. I mean, if they're going to offer up trade references, they're going to give you the people that they normally do business with. And are they going to badmouth these contractors? I doubt it. If I'm going to apply for a job and I'm citing references on my resume, I'm going to use my raving fans, right? So that's what you're going to find with most of these contractors. I don't find trade references very insightful. Background checks and credit reports. I mean, I have a feeling I'm going to get some comments on that, but I'm not a big fan of asking for these. In fact, I think that you eliminate more quality contractors than the bad players, because many of your excellent, your good quality contractors, they can cherry pick the jobs they want to work on, and they're not going to prioritize a job that's being backed by a lender asking for extensive personal information, like their social security number, when they can have plenty of opportunities elsewhere, for example, cash clients. To me, contractor vetting should balance risk mitigation, of course, but with practical application in the field. The goal here isn't to create hurdles, but to identify meaningful risk. So let's talk about some of these credentials in more detail. I'm going to start with licensing and registration because I see a common mistake here. Something that many lenders don't fully understand is that contractor licensing requirements don't just happen at one level of government. Those requirements can exist at the state level, the county level, and the local level. And the requirements between those governmental agencies, they can overlap or they might be completely different. Sometimes during that initial conversation with the contractor, they're going to tell you, yeah, I'm licensed. I would never assume a contractor is properly licensed just because they say they are, especially if the property is in a border state. It's true, sometimes states, they allow reciprocal licensing, but not always. So you're going to want to research the requirements where the property is located, not where the contractor's office is located. Again, where the property is located, because the requirements, they're not always the same. Let's move on to workers' compensation because I see another common pitfall here. It's an area where lenders frequently get tripped up. And to be fair, many contractors don't fully understand their state's requirements either. So this can get a little muddy. Managing renovation loans means balancing a lot of moving parts. For years, I've relied on Langorilla's comprehensive draw management software to eliminate manual errors and keep projects moving. It handles everything, from overall draw pipeline scaling to the tedious day-to-day renovation-specific headaches like built-in databases for 203K consultants and contractors, automating credential tracking, and streamlining disbursements. Backed by ongoing support that's friendly and experienced, they're a total game changer. Visit Langorilla.com today. Workers' compensation laws, they vary state to state, and every state's requirements are different. Some states, they will require coverage based on an employee count. The most common I see is 3 employees or more would require coverage, but some states might count the owner and others might not. And then there are some states that count subcontractors as employees, which could come as a surprise, but it happens. And there are still other states that require waivers or clearance certificates if a contractor is not required to carry workers' comp coverage. If the property is in one of those states that require a waiver or clearance cert to be filed through the state, then you're going to need the official waiver or clearance cert. Again, I want to emphasize that you should never rely solely on the contractor's interpretation or what they say. Always verify the requirements through the state's website. Moving on to specialty certifications. There are certain projects that are going to require specialized credentials. Again, radon, mold, asbestos, and then lead-based paint. I want to spend a moment on lead-based paint in particular. The EPA has something called the RRP rule. It's the Renovation, Repair, and Painting Program rule. And it's going to require lead-based paint certification anytime 20 square feet or more of an exterior surface is being disturbed, 6 square feet or more of an interior surface is being disturbed, anytime there's window replacement, anytime any demolition work is being done. Most of the time, you can look up the contractor on the EPA website and figure out whether or not they're lead-based paint certified. But there are some states that have their own lead-based paint certification program, so it kind of depends on where the property is located, but usually you can find these things online. And not every project requires these. I gave you those 4 instances where lead-based paint certification is required, but it's only for properties that were built before 1978. When lead-based paint certification is required, it should be obtained before the work begins, not after. And there is one caveat to this. If you have the property tested for lead-based paint before closing and you get a test back and it's negative, you don't have to worry about the lead-based paint certification in your loan file. But that lead-based paint test that comes back negative, it has to be done by a lead-based paint certified inspector. It can't be one of those swab tests that you can get from a big box store. Now that we've talked about contractor credentials and what you're asking for, let's talk about that process. I'm a huge fan of online contractor vetting systems. To me, they're faster, they're easier, and then once the contractor completes everything, it gets delivered to you in a nicely organized package. But before I send a contractor to a portal, I would give them a heads up. And I would tell them to be prepared to upload copies of their licensing or registration, their liability coverage, their workers' compensation, those specialty certifications we talked about, and their W-9. I would give them that information before they even begin. To me, if you just set that expectation, it's going to reduce the amount of time that they spend online and they can thank you later. Look, we can all set the best expectations possible. Not everybody's going to listen. I mean, you can lead a horse to water, right? So it's probably inevitable that you're going to have to chase down some documents. And again, I'm going to encourage you to call, not email. Contractors, they live in the field. Many of them spend very little time behind a computer. So emails are going to get missed pretty easily, but calls and texts, they're more likely to get answered. When documents are outstanding, call. I know it's against the grain and we're in a habit of emailing, but I'm going to ask you, don't automatically default to email. You're going to shave off a lot of time waiting for documents if you just call and take that proactive approach. Let's change topics here and talk about quote unquote pre-approving contractors. It's not a practice that I recommend. I'm going to tell you why. Every lender eventually hears a request to pre-approve contractors from a loan officer before there are any deals in the pipeline. Imagine this. Loan officer goes to a networking event, they meet a contractor, they start talking about renovation loans. The contractor is very interested and asks if they can get on the list of the lender's approved contractors. Loan officer is really excited because they don't know any better and they come back to the office. Every lender eventually is going to hear a request from a loan officer to pre-approve a contractor before there are any deals in the pipeline. And my recommendation, don't do it. It sounds great on the surface, but in my experience, there's usually very little benefit in it. Too many of those quote unquote pre-approved contractors, they never send referrals. Meanwhile, as a lender, you're paying salaries for staff that's spending time vetting contractor credentials while waiting for the first deal to roll in, and licenses start to expire, insurance expires, certifications expire. And what's at the heart of this request from the contractor usually is because they're expecting referrals. Lenders shouldn't be referring contractors due to liability concerns. So if the main reason that this contractor wants to get on the list is their assumption that you're going to refer them business, it's a moot point. I would make sure as a loan officer during that conversation, you identify their reason, their motive for getting on that list. And if their motive is to get referrals from you, well, there's no sense in pre-approving them because you can't send them referrals. I recommend you approve contractors when there's a live loan, not long before one exists. Okay, let's touch on one last topic before we start to wrap this up. Reference checks and what actually works. Reference checks, they're going to be required, and that's fine. But let's be honest, again, like the trade references that we talked about at the beginning of the episode, most references aren't going to tell you a contractor is terrible. The contractors are typically going to put their best foot forward and offer up their raving fans as client references. I recommend instead that you start online and check reviews first because they're often more revealing than client references. If you do have to take the route of the manual reference checks, then you might ask some questions like, when was the work completed? Sometimes these homeowners, they hire these contractors more than once. So you want to get some insight on how long they've been working with the contractor or when was the last time that they hired the contractor. What kind of work was performed? Did they perform the work satisfactorily? Mostly we're just trying to find out, did they get the job done on time and within budget? And then of course, would you hire them again? And that last question is usually the most important. So looking at the bigger picture here, when we're talking about validating contractor credentials, most lenders spend more time evaluating a borrower's credit report than they do evaluating the person who's going to be responsible for completing the renovations. Yet one of those people is about to control tens or maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars in renovation funds. That's worth thinking about. If and when this is done properly, contractor vetting, it reduces risk and it protects borrowers, it protects lenders and investors, it protects reputations. But remember, the best contractor vetting processes, they strike a balance between thoroughness and practicality in the field. In a future episode, we're going to take the next step and discuss draw administration, because vetting the contractor is really only half the battle. Making sure that they understand the specific bid requirements and managing the flow of renovation funds after closing, equally as important. Before we wrap up, I want to invite some listener engagement. What are your thoughts on credit and background checks? Have you seen lenders making the contractor vetting process harder than it needs to be, or maybe not hard enough? Send me an email at jennifer@therenogal.com or leave a message at 844-RENOGAL and follow the prompts. Your experience may be highlighted in a future episode, and that could be really helpful to another lender, helping them to avoid a costly mistake. Thank you for spending a part of your day with me. This is renovatED for Lenders. Thank you for listening to renovatED for Lenders. This episode was brought to you by Land Gorilla. Deliver clarity to borrowers, contractors, and your operations team with the industry's most trusted draw management solutions. Visit landgorilla.com today.